Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss any update from Rouse IAS Study Circle. Join the only official Telegram channel of Rouse IAS Study Circle to get the relevant materials and important updates. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, the platform where we analyze the Hindu Daily edition on daily basis from all the possible dimensions which are relevant for the UPSC Civil Service examination. So today we are going to discuss the Hindu Daily edition dated 18th June 2022. The topics which are to be discussed have been enlisted on your screen and the timestamping of the same has been provided in the description box below.
Dear UPSC aspirant, you must be aware of the fact that selection of right optional is very important from the perspective of getting top ranks. And if you're feeling confused about which optional to choose, then we have a solution for you. You can actually meet and interact with Rouse IAS optional educators so that you can get complete clarity in terms of which optional to choose, how you're going to approach it, and how the teachers are going to help you in terms of developing a holistic approach in this particular perspective. Now, the optional counseling session will be conducted in two centers. First is, of course, Bengaluru, where we'll be conducting optional counseling session for sociology and history on 17th from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. and for public administration and geography from 3:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. Now, in this session, you can actually attend the session, interact with the teacher, and can understand how the teachers are going to help you in terms of solving your problems and giving you the best output that you are expecting from the coming attempt at the UPSC examination. Optional counseling session for our Delhi centers will be conducted on 18th and 19th, and these will be conducted for 8 different subjects. On 18th, we'll be conducting the optional counseling for sociology and public administration from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. and for psychology and history from 3:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. On 19th of July, we'll be conducting the optional counseling for anthropology and PSIR from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. and for geography and economics from 3:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. So if in case you haven't finalized your optional so far, or you want to understand more about the subject, then you can interact with teachers of Rouse IAS and can develop complete clarity. You might also be confused between two optionals, so you can actually interact with the teachers of both the subject and can understand which one will fit your bill perfectly. Here you are going to interact, you will also understand how teachers basically teach and how they will be helping you in terms of hand-holding you in this entire journey and become more and more proficient in terms of taking the optional in the right perspective. Try to understand that when you talk about the optional, it is a journey that matters, and journey matters when you have the right guide. So the teachers of Rouse IAS are going to be your best guide in this entire process.
Our first topic has appeared at page number 12 in today's newspaper and is in relation to the recent floods and landslides which has occurred in the state of Assam and Meghalaya. This is the very context of this very news article, that around 13 people across 3 districts of Meghalaya have been killed due to landslips and around 7 people have been killed in Assam due to floods. Now this topic is very relevant from UPSC's examinations perspective, mainly in 2 papers, that is General Studies paper 1 as well as paper 3. In paper 1, we have the syllabus of important geophysical phenomena, whereby you can be asked on questions related to landslides, its concept, its causes, etc. And similarly, in General Studies paper 3, because we have a topic of disaster and disaster management, that is why you can be asked the questions on management of landslides, that how to deal with landslides and to reduce the losses of life and property. For example, in 2013, UPSC asked the question, bring out the causes for more frequent landslides in Himalayas than in Western Ghats. For this to answer, you must be aware about the basic causes of landslides, and then you have to analyze that what are those causes which are more frequent in Himalayas compared to Western Ghats. So in today's session, we are going to cover all the possible dimensions associated with landslides. For example, we will discuss what is the concept of landslide, then we'll discuss what are various types of landslides, then we will come to the analytical part, that is the causes of landslides. Then, with the help of India's map, we will discuss the spatial analysis and distribution in the intensity of landslides across various regions. And in the end, we will discuss that what are the NDMA guidelines, that is National Disaster Management Authority guidelines, in order to prevent the risk and damage associated with the disaster of landslides. So hence in today's session, we will discuss the landslides as a geophysical phenomena as well as the disaster management aspect of landslides. So now let us begin our discussion. First is that what is the concept of landslides? Now landslides are the rapid mass movements. Now what are mass movements and how are they different from erosion? Now this is a basic geographical concept. Any land movement which can be in the form of rocks, muds, stones or the complete sheet of land which is coming down the hill due to the sole influence of gravity force. Now this is the basic difference. What is erosion? Erosion is the movement of particles because of some erosional agents, that is like water, wind, glaciers, etc. Right? But what is mass movement? Mass movement is the detachment and downward movement of particles under the sole influence of gravitational force. Another example of the mass movement is all we know are the avalanches. So similarly, landslides are also a type of mass movement, but they are rapid mass movements because again, mass movement can also be of two types, that is either they are rapid or they are slow. So landslides, because we all know that they have a very huge velocity, that is why these are the rapid mass movements. The particles in the landslides can come down in the form of three types of motions. Either the particles can slide, the particles can come down toppling, and the particles can fall down directly as well. So till now we have understood that what is the basic concept of landslides. Now what are those factors on which landslides depend? That why there are certain areas which are more vulnerable to landslides compared to other areas. For example, as we discussed, in 2013 the question was asked that why Himalayas are more vulnerable to landslides compared to Western Ghats. So the answer lies in understanding the basic factors behind the landslides. For example, the first factor is the structure of the rock. If the structure is weak enough, obviously we can understand that those rock structures will be more vulnerable to landslides. And we all know that Himalayas are sedimentary rock structures. The sedimentary rocks are weaker and softer in nature, whereas the Western Ghats are of hard rock systems. That is why Himalayas are more vulnerable. Second comes the slope. If the rock systems are having more gradient, then obviously the landslides in those areas will be higher. Then comes the amount of vegetation also. If the rock particles are covered with adequate amount of vegetation, then the soil particles on those rocks will be bounded together and hence they will be less prone to any movement or landslides. Similarly, the tectonic activities destabilize the rock system and hence occur landslides, and precipitation loosen the bonds between the soil particles and hence make those areas more vulnerable. So these are the factors. However, we will discuss all the causes of landslides here in detail. Now first we will understand what are the various types of landslides. Now landslides can be in the form of fall. Now fall are the free fall movements. That means, for example, that this was a certain rock structure and this is the overhanging cliff. Now because on this rock structure there is a continuous downward action of gravitational force, it might happen that this overhanging cliff can break from this area and it comes downwards. Now this is the free fall movement, correct? Similar to this is the flow movement, but the only difference between fall and flow is that flow is along the slope. It will not be an vertical movement, it will be at some angle along the slope, and moreover the flows also have higher water content in them. Now these flow movements are also categorized as either the mud flow or the debris flow, depending that what is the major constituent of the rocks or sand in that flow. But the one thing is constant, that these flows also have higher water content. The rock particles, debris, stones, sand, silt, clay, etc., they are all mixed with the water, and after mixing with water they come down along the slope. These are the flow movements. Then we also have the creep movement. Now creep movement are very slow movements. They are also generally along the slopes. This is a type of mass movement, as we have discussed that mass movement can be of two types, that is rapid as well as slow. But the landslides are the rapid movements. The creep are the slow mass movements. So I hope till now the concept of landslide and the types of landslides are clear to you. Now let us move towards various causes of landslides. Now there are various factors of landslides as we have already discussed over here. But here I have categorized those factors into four major subparts. That is the geological causes, morphological causes, physical causes, as well as anthropogenic causes. Let us understand all these causes one by one. First, we will come to the geological causes. For example, the weak rock systems, as we discussed, that Himalayas are the sedimentary rocks, and these sedimentary rocks are weaker and softer in nature, and hence they are more vulnerable to the landslides. Second comes the permeability. Now, what is permeability? Now, permeability refers to the property of the rock with which it allows the water to move easily through them. That is, permeability is the easy movement of water. If there is one rock system having several pores in it and it is allowing the water to percolate in those rock systems very easily, then we will call it the rocks having higher permeability. And because now we understand that permeability is to do something with the penetration of water, that means that if the rocks are highly permeable in nature, they will attract more water into them. And if the water enters into a rock system, it will further weaken those rocks. That means the rocks which are highly permeable are more vulnerable to the landslides. Then comes the weathering. Now, weathering and erosion further weaken the rock systems because they detach the rock particles which erstwhile were stable enough. And now, because weathering is the decomposition of the rocks, hence further they loosen the rock particles. Then comes the faults and joints which are there in the rock systems. So obviously, if some rock systems are having higher joints, fractures, faults, fissures, etc. in them, they will be naturally more vulnerable to movement, shaking and vibration, and hence they will be more prone to landslides. Now we'll come to the morphological factors. The first point is the tectonic movement. Now we know that Himalayas are highly tectonic in nature. That means compared to the Western Ghats, Himalayas are continuously uplifting. Western Ghats are relatively stable, rigid blocks. We know that Himalayas are tectonically active areas, and this tectonic instability further causes landslides. Then comes the volcanic eruptions. Suppose this is a rock system and it has experienced a high intense volcano. Now this volcanic eruption will naturally destabilize this existing rock system because new cracks have been formed, and these volcanoes are often associated with huge vibration and shaking of the crust. This in turn will make this particular rock system more vulnerable to landslides. Then comes the super incumbent load, that if we are having this type of rock system and on this particular, let's say, rocks, we have a higher load of sediments, high load of man-made constructions, or very high load of the super incumbent rocks. Now this super incumbent load also make the underlying rocks more vulnerable to the landslides. Correct? Now we'll move towards certain physical factors, for example, rainfall, glacial melt, as well as floods. Now, all these factors we can understand will increase the frequency and intensity of landslides. Now, here one point is very important, that in the beginning when we were discussing about the concept of the landslide, we discussed that these are the type of mass movements, and these mass movements are under the sole influence of gravitational force. That is, gravity is the sole force which makes the mass movement to happen. And because landslides are also the mass movement, that means gravity is the sole force behind landslides also. And now we are discussing that other factors like rainfall, glacial melt, and floods also cause landslides. So the point is that these are not prerequisite for landslides to occur, which means that these are not the necessary conditions. Okay, yes, if we have the presence of rainfall, glacier melt, or floods, then it can only aid the existing landslides. However, the generation of landslides is under the sole influence of gravity. The rock particles which move down are under the sole influence of gravitational force. These are only the aiding factors working just like catalyst in a chemical reaction. This point is very important and you should understand this. Now, in the last, we come to the anthropogenic factors. Now, in recent times, the anthropogenic factors have superseded the natural factors behind many natural disasters, and landslides is also one of them. For example, vicious deforestation activities in the forest areas, in the mountainous areas, have loosened the soil materials and has made the rock system more vulnerable to landslides. Similarly, the construction of, let's say, roads, dams, buildings, etc., have increased the superincumbent load on the underlying rock system and hence making them more vulnerable. Next comes the mining activities. For example, there are deep mining activities, deep boreholes, several horizontal fractures which are being artificially created in the rock systems and thereby destabilizing those rock systems and further leading to the landslides. Similarly, agricultural as well as irrigation practices in mountainous areas, if reaches to the unsustainable level, for example, higher extraction of groundwater from the rocks. Let us understand this. Suppose this is a rock system, and here we have the groundwater table. Now the rock system is over this groundwater table. And let us assume that we have extracted this groundwater because of our irrigational needs. So if we have extracted this groundwater, then here lies the vacuum, and because of this vacuum, this rock which was above the surface will move down, they will slump, and because of this slumping, there can be a landslide. So these are the anthropogenic factors which are making the natural factors more intense to cause the landslides in these areas. And in this news article, because we are dealing with the state of Assam and Meghalaya, which are known for the combination of natural as well as anthropogenic factors creating to natural disasters in those areas. Now let us understand with the help of this map that what are those areas which are more vulnerable to landslides. Now obviously landslides will be in those areas which are steep. That means that landslides will be either in the Himalayan region, which can be Western Himalayas, it can be is the Eastern Himalayas region, it can be in the Meghalaya section, which is the geological part of Peninsular Plateau. But overall, the Peninsular Plateau does not experience landslides because it is a rigid and stable landmass. But the western ghats of this section experience landslides because, despite the fact that they are rigid but they are steep, they experience high precipitation because of the windward sides and they have high anthropogenic load. Because of these three factors, the Western Ghats also experience high landslides. When we talk about the Himalayan part, along with all these three factors, they are tectonically active. They are made up of sedimentary deposits which are weaker enough. Further, there is a high scale deforestation activities as well as tourism which is associated with several hill states of Himachal, Uttarakhand and now the northeastern states as well. Similarly, when we discuss about this Meghalaya region, we all know that the hills of Garo, Khasi and Jaintia experience one of the highest precipitations across the world. Further, the state of Meghalaya is also affected by rat hole mining. Now, what is this rat hole mining? Now, this rat hole mining is also the anthropogenic activity whereby illegal mining of coal is being done through unsustainable mining practices. So, there are some factors which are common across all the regions, and there are certain factors which are unique to that region, and you should know all those factors in order to write a better and precise answers in your mains. Now let us move towards our last part, that is NDMA guidelines, in order to better manage the risk associated with landslides. The first is that there should be a landslide hazard vulnerability and risk assessment. Now, government should take adequate steps in order to assess that risk which has to be managed. If you need to manage certain risk, if you have to take certain actions, first you need to be aware about the intensity of the problem, the gravity of the situation. And that is why regular assessment has to be done in order to understand the risks associated in all these regions. What are those unique factors which operate in certain areas? What are those common factors? And similarly, what are the common steps which can be taken, and what are the unique steps which are area specific which needs to be taken? So in this very regard, first step is that the risk assessment should be done. Second is the developing of early warning systems, because obviously we know that these areas are prone to landslides, and in order to protect the loss of life and property, we need to have early warning systems which can disseminate the information to the local district administration as well as state level authorities, and also communicate well in advance with local communities of those areas so that the necessary steps can be taken, necessary evacuation planning can be done, and people can be transported to the safer areas. Now, the third thing is the frequent investigation. Despite the fact that risk has been assessed and early warning systems have been established, there should be frequent investigations. It should not be the case like, for example, the risk assessment here was done, let's say, we are assuming it, around 20 years back. In the span of these 20 years, there are several factors which have been changed in these areas, and hence the nature of landslides must have changed. There might be new pockets which might have developed in these areas, which might be more vulnerable compared to the conventional pockets, and hence frequent and regular investigations must be done. Then comes the slope stabilization measures. Once we establish that this particular area is more vulnerable to landslides, we must take adequate measures to stabilize the slopes. This can be, for example, afforestation or reforestation activities. We can have certain structural measures in the form of steel pipes, in the form of iron grills. So these measures can be taken in order to stabilize the slope. Then comes the regulation and enforcement mechanism. In all the hilly areas, the building bylaws are different. The building codes are also different, which are made by taking the geological conditions of those areas into account. For example, in the areas which are highly tectonically active, there must be certain limit on the number of floors which a certain building can have, and these laws must be enforced properly, because yes, on papers we have enough laws for those areas, but on practice we do not enforce those laws. So hence proper regulation and enforcement of those laws is the need of the hour. And last is the capacity building of all the stakeholders. Now, capacity building can be of administrators of those areas, capacity building of the disaster response forces, whether it is NDRF or SDRF. Then is the capacity building of the community which is living in those areas. Now, there should be a section wise capacity building. For example, there must be adequate focus given to the women, children, disabled, because these are the vulnerable sections and they face the major loss in the disaster hit regions. So all these capacity building measures must also be taken for all the stakeholders. If this six-pronged strategy is taken well in account, then we expect that we will be in a better situation to manage and avoid the risks associated with the landslides. Now, this was a pretty big topic, and hence we will revise this topic in brief once again. Now here we discuss the basic concept of the landslides, that what are landslides? Landslides are the rapid mass movement in which the particles come down under the sole influence of gravity. Then we discuss the various types of landslides, which can be in the form of fall, flow, slides, etc. Then in detail we discussed about the various causes of landslides, and we divided all the causes into four major dimensions, that is geological causes, morphological causes, physical causes, and anthropogenic causes. Here we learned that how tectonic activities, how the weaker rock systems, and how the various agents of movement like precipitation, glacial melts, etc., aid the landslides. Then we also learned that in recent times the anthropogenic activities like deforestation, construction, mining, agriculture, etc., have further increased the frequency as well as vulnerability of landslides. Then, with the help of this map, we had a spatial analysis of India, the regions vulnerable to landslides, the common as well as unique factors operating in certain areas. For example, the rat hole mining in the state of Meghalaya, higher precipitation rates in Western Ghats, and the sedimentary rocks in the Himalayan part. Then in the last, we discussed the NDMA guidelines, which were related to the risk assessment, developing early warning system, frequent and regular investigations, slope stabilization measures, proper regulation and enforcement of all the existing laws, and the capacity building of all the stakeholders at district level, at the response forces level, and at the community level. This article has appeared at page number 8 and is in relation to the need for the gender neutral laws in India. Now, this topic is written in the context of the parliaments. However, if we look at the general laws in India also, it seems that the terminology used in those laws are biased against the women and in favor of men. We will establish this claim with certain examples also. So in newspapers, many a times there are several topics which gives you a different perspective. And similarly, this article has also given us a different perspective in relation to the gender equity. This topic talks about that the legal language which is used in several laws, rules of procedures of parliament as well as the constitution, they are discriminatory in nature. This article mentions that despite India having women prime minister, despite the fact that we had women president and a relatively higher percentage of women parliamentarians when compared to the other countries, still India is struggling with the inclusivity which has not yielded any significant result. Moreover, the gender issues are not restricted to the women alone. They also have a different and important component of transgenders. Many a times it happens that when we talk about the gender equality, we always focus towards the men and women equality. Even in those debates, the transgenders are missing many a times. So that is why the language of the laws, policies, procedures should be gender neutral. It should not be biased in favor of men or women for that matter. So that is why this very article says that despite the Supreme Court recognizing the transgenders as the third gender, the issue of gender disparity continues. Further, the Parliament of India, being the symbol for democracy and the pinnacle institution for making the laws, should start the process of making our laws gender neutral, starting from the Constitution of India itself. Now, let us understand all these things with certain interesting examples. For example, whenever you read the Constitution, you come across a term that is UPSC chairman. Now, the man is obviously a masculine pronoun. Why are not we using UPSC chairperson? Now, this is very important to understand that the language of the things which are written are also biased against women and in favor of men. Similarly, we read that Vice President of India. Now, this president, though, is a gender neutral term, but we read that Vice President of India is the ex officio chairman of Rajya Sabha. Similarly, in several legislative assemblies as well as parliament, many a times women MP is called as chairman madam. Now here, despite the word madam is being used, but still, first it comes as chairman madam. Similarly, in day-to-day lives, various IPS officers are called as madam sir. So these are some routine examples which show that there are issues with the common terminologies in laws, policies as well as administration. In this very regard, the article mentions that there were certain steps which were taken in this regard. For example, when Mrs. Meera Kumar was the chairperson of In 2014, the rules of procedure of Lok Sabha were amended, and there the chairman word was replaced by the chairperson. And all the rules of procedure of Lok Sabha were made as gender neutral. Similarly, recently the Election Laws Amendment Act of 2021 has replaced the term wife as the spouse. Now, this spouse is also a gender neutral term. So that is why it is very important for us to understand that when Parliament and government offices reinforce the gender biases in their communication, stereotypical language in reference to women and transgender people becomes more palatable to the rest of the country. The country's leaders must send the right message for citizens to follow, and they can start this with amending the constitution itself. In the 21st century, when people of all the genders are leading the world with comparison, strength, and ambitions, the Indian Parliament needs to reflect on its standing and take appropriate steps not only to make the laws, rules, regulations, processes gender neutral, but also to provide an able environment where women can work and flourish without being prejudiced by a male dominant society. So, the crux and a different perspective which this article has given us is the gender equity in terms of terminology which is being used in laws, procedures, administration, etc. This topic has appeared at page number 1 and is in relation to the upcoming summit of the BRICS organization. This is the very context of this news article also, that the upcoming summit will be hosted by China. Now, if you analyze the previous year questions also, especially in the preliminary examination, you can find that every year at least 1 to 2 questions are asked on the basis of international groupings, regions, or organizations. For example, the question related to the BRICS organization was asked in 2014. There were 2 statements given, and you had to find the correct statement out of these given 2 statements. The question said that, with reference to a grouping of countries known as BRICS, consider the following statements. The first summit of the BRICS was held in Rio de Janeiro, and the second statement said that South Africa was the last to join the BRICS grouping. The answer to this question you will find in today's session. So now let us go through some of the key facts related to the BRICS organization. Now, the BRICS was formalized during the first meeting of the BRICS foreign ministers in New York in September 2006. Now, this is important that in New York it was formalized, but the first BRICS summit was held in Russia in 2009. So by this date, we have BRIC organization. BRIC is for Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Importantly, India is the founding member of this organization. But more importantly, South Africa is still not there. So the question is, when did South Africa join? South Africa joined in New York again in September 2010. Now, because in 2010 BRICS was formed, so this is very important. BRICS, South Africa, this organization was formed in 2010 in New York, and that is why the 10th anniversary of BRICS organization was celebrated last year only by the leaders, that is in 2020. Out of all these summits, the most important summit of BRICS is the 6th BRICS summit, which was also known as Fortaleza Declaration. And this summit was so important that India has termed this particular summit as the second cycle of the BRICS summit. Now, Fortaleza Declaration also inaugurated the New Development Bank. Now, New Development Bank is the BRICS bank, which was established in order to develop alternative arrangements to the IMF as well as World Bank. However, the official document says that it is not in competition to the IMF or World Bank. Rather, it is to support IMF and World Bank in their global goals of financial inclusion, etc. So these were some of the historical key facts related to the BRICS organization. In relation to this only, one important terminology, that is Sherpa mechanism, also comes. Now, what do you understand by Sherpa? This Sherpa refers to the representative of the states or governments. Whenever at an international platform, the countries have to negotiate or have to discuss certain aspects, they are represented by a certain people. So Sherpa are those representatives of the states and governments who lay out the preparations for significant global summits such as BRICS as well as G7. So this is very important as Sherpa mechanism is in G7 as well as BRICS. Further, another important angle of BRICS organization is that recently there have been talks to further expand the BRICS also, and this grouping is known as the BRICS Plus. It is just the plan which aims to welcome more countries and enhance the economic conditions. China actively supports to start the BRICS expansion process and broaden the BRICS Plus cooperation. So we have discussed the BRICS organization today from the prelims section. In the continuation of the same objective that we know that organizations and groupings are very important, another important grouping which has appeared in today's The Hindu Delhi edition is the FATF. Now FATF stands for the Financial Action Task Force. Now as the name is suggesting that this organization has to do something with the financial sector. In this very line, now we will go through certain key facts related to the FATF. FATF is again an intergovernmental body which was established in 1989 by G7 countries. Now, India is not the founding member of FATF. However, presently India is member but not a founding member. This FATF was established in Paris, that is France, and the broader objectives of FATF were to set the standards and promote effective implementation of the measures to combat three areas. One is the money laundering, second, terror financing, and third, all those practices which threaten the integrity of international financial systems. Again, I am repeating these. Three things are looked by FATF. One is the money laundering, terror financing, and any practice which threaten the integrity of international financial system. In line with FATF organization, there is one more terminology which is seen frequently in newspapers. That is FATF 40 plus 9. Now what does this numerical digit that is 40 plus 9 stands for? Now there are 40 recommendations given by FATF against money laundering, as well as in addition to this there are 9 special recommendations against the terror financing. So in all there are 49 recommendations. 40 recommendations are for money laundering and 9 recommendations are for terror financing, and hence the 40 plus 9 terminology appears. Further, if you look at the working process of FATF, FATF conducts the peer reviews of each member to assess the levels of implementation their national policies in order to strengthen the financial system. And if you go by the important listings of FATF, there are two important lists. One is the blacklist and other is the grey list. Now blacklist consists of those countries or territories which are considered to be uncooperative in international efforts against money laundering and terror financing. That means these countries are straightaway declared that they are not cooperating with the world in order to strengthen the financial system. But the grey list are those countries which in the degree of severity is one lesser than the countries in the blacklist. The grey list are those countries which have strategic deficiencies in their financial system. That is why they are not blacklisted yet. Still, there are certain extra steps which these countries have to take in order to return back to the normal list. And this was the very context of today's news item also. The heading read that Pakistan may get off the FATF grade list after on-site check. Now this topic has appeared at page number 1 in today's The Hindu Daily edition. This topic talks about off to school through swirling waters. Now, this topic covers a special story of the plight of the tribal children in the state of Kerala who every day cross rivers and walk several miles in order to attain the education. However, in today's session, we are going to discuss about this specific river, that is Cheliyar River. If we go by the previous year question paper analysis, almost every year there is at least one question in preliminary examination in the context of certain rivers or tributaries. For example, in UPSC 27, question was asked with reference to the river Teesta, and the options in this question were related to several tributaries and characteristics of river Teesta. Similarly, in UPSC 2016, the question was asked in relation to tributaries of river Brahmaputra. In this very line, in today's session, we are going to discuss certain key facts related to the Cheliyar River. Now, Cheliyar River originates in the state of Tamil Nadu and passes through the state of Kerala and it enters to the Arabian Sea. It has a total length of 169 kilometers in the state of Kerala and is the fourth largest river of Kerala. It has another name also, which is the Baipur River. It joins the Arabian Sea as an estuary. It originates in the Elambalarai Hills on the Western Ghats in Tamil Nadu. Now, despite the fact that this river is located in peninsular India, still it does not get dried up even during the summer season. That means the water is perpetually present in this basin across the year. However, in recent times, there have been several instances of water contamination in this particular river. With coming up of pulp factories in these areas, they have caused severe damage to the rivers by releasing their polluted and untreated wastes into them. This has further altered the life of the aquatic systems present in this particular river. Now is the time for the question of the day. The question from yesterday's DNS was in relation to the type of unemployment. The question said that if a man is unemployed due to the unavailability of work in which he was skilled, which of the following unemployment would be the reason? So answer to this particular question is A, that is educated unemployment. The question from today's DNS is in relation to the Fortaleza Declaration. The question says that among which of the following organizations this declaration is related to? Option A, SCO, option B, BRICS, option C, FATF, option D, World Bank.